Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols Plus, a PlayStation podcast supplement. My name is Colin Moriarty. Today I'm joined by a very special guest, someone who has a very interesting tale to tell that I think will help us fill in some of, let's call it the PlayStation lore about how games are made perhaps in the PlayStation ecosystem, but from the lower rungs of the ladder, from QA. I'm very pleased to welcome Kendrick Luckenbach to this show. Kendrick, how are you, my friend?
Hey, Colin. It's good to be here with you today. Thank you so much, man.
So you and I had corresponded about this, and I was interested in, you wrote a pretty long email, and there were so many things that we could talk about. Now, the first thing to say is that we're not going to talk about what you do now, but we're going to talk about what you used to do. And I am really fascinated specifically by your time at San Diego Studio in QA between 2017 and 2020, I think, right? That's right.
Yeah. So
go ahead, please. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Yes, please.
Sure thing. Sorry to interrupt you. I worked for Sony Interactive Entertainment of America in San Diego, contracted through Yo Services LLC from February 2017 to summer 2020. And as we talked about, I worked in quality assurance as a contract QA tester. And I primarily started working on MLB The Show 17. And that was kind of where I made my bread and butter. I'm a huge fan of the MLB The Show franchise. I've played since I was a kid. So it was a perfect fit for me to jump in there as a QA tester and kind of do what I did growing up as far as gameplay goes, and then learning that from a dev side. So I worked all the way into MLB 20, the show. And then in my time in the MLB off season, if you will, in development, I supported live content with that. I worked with projects like PlayStation Vue, have second party experience with Ready Set Heroes, and then primarily working on MLB The Show though, and it's a perfect opportunity there because you get to work with the first party studio there in Sony San Diego Studios, and then it's housed with a bunch of other different studios. There's the Sony VASG, the Visual Art Service Group, that does like motion capture and a lot of like art support on titles. And it's actually a pretty big campus. Actually, I think a lot of people don't realize that San Diego is a huge bed of game development. You know, there's Psyonix is out here that does Rocket League. There's Rockstar San Diego is out here. Daybreak, formerly known as Sony Online Entertainment. Mm-hmm. So San Diego's a pretty good.
I've been to all three of those places down there. It's interesting. Yeah, Daybreak especially is interesting. I went there when they were still Sony Online, but San Diego Studio, I wrote a brief history on San Diego Studio, I think in 2012. And so I went and interviewed everyone there. And I was actually quite fascinated by the team because they seem to be, I mean, every development team is obsessive, but it seems because of the very tight window that they have to develop these games in that they really live and breathe this stuff. And I'm wondering what your before we get into the QA and all the things you did with the games, because I'm curious about that, obviously. I'm curious what your takeaway from the team was. Like, what was it like working alongside those guys? Because as I've said on the show many times, I will never forget going into the producer's office and he had a mattress on the floor in his office because he'd never left. He would just sleep there.
Gosh, yeah. So
talk to me a little bit about them.
When I started working there, I remember your piece and like your history of Naughty Dog and Santa Monica and so on. And so I read your piece about San Diego just to see the difference of it. And man, it's the change between that 5 years can do from 2012 when you wrote that piece, I believe, from 2017 is like totally different. So I feel like a lot of that like crunching culture is kind of just not there anymore. I feel like that changed a lot with leadership. And I think one of the big changes with that is when I started there in MLB 17, I was lucky in that was when they dropped PS3 support and when they dropped Vita support. Right. And so that was the first title, 17, that was only on PS4. And I think that streamlined so much of the team and the crunch culture there because you weren't supporting 3 platforms. Suddenly you're supporting one SKU on one platform. It completely changes your dev structure, allows you to change the title. And when we talk about sports games and development, it's a 3-year cycle with an annualized game because your first year is you're setting the ground, you're laying the groundwork. Your second year is proving that groundwork can be built. And then your third year is putting a roof on that house and putting the roof on the house that you built, if you will. So 17 was the start of like a brand new dev cycle for them where they are on PS4. They're able to use more of the memory that PS4 allows, able to add in features in there. I saw huge jumps with Diamond Dynasty, the online games of service, I guess, as you will. And so the games of service model changed there because they were able to use the PS4 online infrastructure to have more monetization in the game, more support with titles, realizing that they could update these games so much faster than you could on PS3. There's a system in MLB The Show that is a live rating system. And it's this incredible system that no other sports game has for their live service, where it grabs the stats of an MLB player overnight and then dynamically changes the rating in the game every couple days during the week. And I don't think that live rating system could have worked on PS3 or Vita because of how much you need to be hitting the network infrastructure, the way that PS3's network infrastructure was built, and then just the differences that PS4 has. That the fact that to this day on PS4 and PS5, when, Shohei Ohtani, the cover athlete this year for MLB 22, when he has a huge pitching game where he goes like a complete game, but then he also hits 2 home runs, that dynamic rating changed where his card pitcher rating and hitting rating changes at the same time. And you can see that change within a couple of days. And for, the baseball nerds out there, the fantasy baseball guys, it's huge to see that in a game. I wish that Madden had that. I wish that FIFA had that when like Champions League is going on, Premier League is going on. And MLB is doing that purely because they're supporting, the one console. And then that allowed them to eventually, when the MLB moved them along to Xbox, and then they'll be on Switch this year, they're able to put that out there as well. So that's one of the advantages they get from PS4.
I was going to say, it's so interesting to hear you say that because I'm not a sports gamer really anymore. But when I was a kid, I was really into sports. It's so weird because I played JRPGs, platformers, and sports games. And I would buy Madden every year and NHL every year, probably from 1993 to 2004 or something like that. And as you recall, I'm sure if you were playing sports games at the time, if you were a huge nerd like I was, I would go into Newsday, Long Island's newspaper. There, like 1995, I'd be playing NHL 94 or 96, I guess it would be actually NHL 96. And I'd go into the transactions and it would be like, this guy was traded to this team. This guy was released. And I would go into the roster on NHL 96 myself, and I would move them all around. And it was kind of fun and satiating to be able to do that. You can trick the computer into making bad trades and all these kinds of things. And that's how we made it as real as possible without roster updates. So the idea that we couldn't even get a roster update more than once a year was a bummer. That you can get a roster update dynamically about a player's skill is super cool, and I can see how satiating that would be. It's also interesting to hear from you about how San Diego's culture has changed. Christian Phillips is no longer there anymore, who was a really interesting guy that ran that studio. I think the culture there without him is different, for better or for worse. I'm wondering, how did you get involved? You were talking about this company Yo that brought you in. I'd never heard of them. I was reading about them a little bit. It's like a services company and a talent company. And I'm wondering how you found your way specifically to San Diego and how you first found it. If you enjoyed it, you obviously stayed there for 4 years or so. So you found some satisfaction there, but how did you find your way there to begin with?
Yeah, I enjoyed my time there a lot. So it was kind of like luck of the draw. So I've always been trying to get into the games industry in some way. And I've kind of followed the road that you kind of built and some of the other folks at IGN built, where I went to journalism school and I wanted to be either a sports journalist or a games journalist. And so I kind of had my foot in like both those doors, and I would apply to internships here and there while I was going to school. And I never actually finished school. I dropped out of journalism school midway through my college career. And so I was kind of like floating around through jobs and stuff, and I was doing a sports journalism gig. And then once I was released from my contract on that, I was kind of looking around on LinkedIn through contract work, and I found the QA tester position with PlayStation. And so applied there. And then I knew that to get into I wanted that job so bad. Like I wanted that job more than anything. And when I was like, driving up to the campus and going to my interview and stuff, I was fully prepared there to pitch myself as what the job is today, a baseball test analyst, which is a job that they actually hire for. So when Sony hires for QA, they hire for a couple different things. And one of the ones that I had pitched to them was hiring for what is called a baseball test analyst. So this is a QA tester specifically targeted for working on MLB The Show. And they want someone with knowledge that can basically like a franchise nerd, someone who knows players that can name you off. Hey, what's the best AAA scout for the Seattle Mariners team right now? What's the players that are coming up for that? Find a guy who knows about that can QA test it, and then make sure that those players are accurate while they're QA testing the game over a season. And so I pitched myself to them and I basically said, hey, when I was a kid, MLB The Show was one of my favorite games growing up. I've loved sports games. And I played this game on PS2 and PSP in 2008. And I would play Road to the Show. I would play franchise. And then when I was going to school or whether I was sitting on the couch with my dad watching baseball, I would take my PS2 save, go to sleep, and export the save to my PSP. I would play it on my PSP for a few days. And then when it was the weekend, when all my homework was done and stuff, I would export that save back up to my PS2 and do that. And they were shocked. They were frankly flabbergasted in the interview because they were like, oh my gosh, I didn't know anybody did that. Year to year isn't a feature that's supported anymore on between like the consoles and everything. But like year to year saves for me, I was like, oh my gosh, dude, I can take my progress from MLB 08 to MLB 09. That was like a huge thing for me as a kid. So that was basically how I pitched them in the interview. Like I was just straight up was like, I don't know what other games you guys support here. I don't know what you guys QA, but I want to work on baseball. I'm passionate about sports titles and I want to be that guy for you guys. And I felt like that was one of the main impacts was I told them, I was like, you have to target this job for baseball test analysts. You have to get these guys from the farm system, if you will, to use the sports analogy. You need your farm system in San Diego QA to eventually have someone for Sony San Diego to pick up internally. So they don't have to bring out someone externally. They can have someone who learns the game from the ground up and then eventually goes into dev work. And there's a huge QA team now, first party at Sony San Diego, that are guys that I came up with, that it's very important to have those guys in production, I feel like, because they can be the middleman between QA and between dev and make sure that structure is huge there. And I think that's a testament to what I was able to see there starting in 2017.
Well, that's why I think your story is so interesting, because a few weeks ago, not that it went totally into this, but I had Jessica Gonzalez on, who is famous for being kind of the lead. She doesn't work at Activision anymore, but she's kind of the lead of their labor movement, a better Activision. And I feel a better ABK actually is what it's really called. And we hear about how bad QA is all the time, how it's slave work, basically, that it seems unappreciated and no one cares about them and they're just overworked. And I have no doubt that this is true, but I kind of am interested in talking to you about the other side of the coin to present both sides, because I feel like we don't hear enough about even the mechanics of QA, how it works. Nonetheless, if people enjoy it, if they really do rise up, if they really do stay, we don't seem to hear from it's just like the internet. You don't hear from the people that are happy. You hear from the people that are upset. So I want to ask you, like, what is it like to work at QA? Walk me through. I mean, that's a broad question, but walk me through like some of the things that you guys would do and what it was like and why it's important.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the main reasons that I wrote into you guys, because it started out really as a question of you and Dustin were kind of talking about the whole thing going on at Raven QA and like Activision and everything.
Right.
And you guys talked about like, you guys talked about like the crunch and stuff. And like, there's jokes like, did you guys do a knockback about Grandma's Boy, by the way?
Yeah, we did.
That's what people think QA is today in 2022. When the movie came out in 1999, like, dude, I was in elementary school when that movie came out, frankly. And the fact that people still think that QA is like that today, where it's just a bunch of like dude bros and frat guys that are like, oh, we're playing video games from 10 a.m. to midnight, baby. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
You even people really think the tech industry works this way with Apple and Google and everything? Oh my gosh. Like, and that's what the Twitterverse would have you think QA is like. They really would. This small group of people that are out there frolicking and mobbing with Jason Schreier, and they think that everyone in QA is mistreated. And, I think obviously Activision is a culture issue, but the way that they've treated their QA, the stories that I've heard, and the Sacred Symbols Plus episode with Jessica was a great episode. Highly recommend people go check that out. And the way that she spoke about how passionate their group is about union work and the things that they've seen in QA, I've never seen those things in my experience working for Sony QA and working with San Diego Studios. And like we talked about, it's a culture issue. There is a systemic culture issue that is baked into companies like Activision, where the people that are at the top made their bread and butter in the 90s and 2000s. And they have a serious disconnect with the folks that are coming into this industry in QA. And that's a serious generational gap. And you don't think that a 10-year, 20-year difference is a generational gap, but it's a generational gap in the workforce. And from what I've seen with Sony QA, and like I talked about, I was contracted with Yo Services LLC. Sony used to have a different contracting company, and the QA testers there in the early 2000s or late 2000s, sorry, in the the PS3 generation, they felt like they weren't being heard, and they felt like they didn't have good representatives. And so the Sony QA managers came together and they switched that over with Yo Services LLC. And so Yo has a representative there at the Sony office, and they're there basically to listen, and they're there to listen to the QA testers and listen to any of the issues that they have. And that's a huge deal, that there's somebody there on the ground floor provided by the contracting company, and they're there to speak to the managers and have dialogue with them and make sure that the testers are heard should there be any issues. And that frankly alleviates a lot of the issues. That feeling like when you're on contract and feeling like because you're not a full-time employee there, you can't talk to management, you can't speak up because you're scared that they're going to get rid of your contract. That's a shame. Like, that's a real shame that that's an issue in our industry today. And it's not like that at Sony, because they have someone there with Yo to represent you.
Why? I mean, I know the answer to this, but I guess we should elucidate this for the audience more. Why is Sony contracting QA at all? Why aren't they making you guys full-time employees of the developers? This is obviously a major sticking point. Some studios do have QA. There's no doubt that there is Sony side QA at all these studios too, but why is it treated like a contract, or is a contract position as opposed to an internal position? Yeah. Why does it? Wouldn't it be better, to play devil's advocate, wouldn't it be better if there was no one from Yo there because San Diego studio itself employed you? Sure.
I mean, so it's not, to change that, what you just said, so it's not Sony San Diego technically like employing you. It's SIE, what is now PlayStation Studios QA. So it was known as Worldwide Studios QA when I was there. So it's SIE. And I mean, they contract people with Yo. They have artists and developers they have positions at Santa Monica. They have positions that Naughty Dog that are contracted. They have artists that are contracted. And I think it's purely because it's entry level. That QA position is seen as entry level. And then if you are hired on to be a senior QA tester or a lead QA tester, then you're hired on within the company. But I think you're contracted as entry level to kind of see, your testing ground. It's like, to use the sports analogy again, it's like being signed to a rookie contract. Can you prove yourself within your 2 to 3 years that you can be hired on? So I think that's why. And I think that it's just like, it's, a farming ground. It's a test bed, like I talked about. They want to evaluate you as an employee on your contract. And then, you're contracted up to 2 years with Yo. So you're contracted for 2 years, and then your contract gets renewed if you are, seen as a good employee. So you're valued on that sense. And then, you're told if you're on a track to be hired on. And so that's how that whole side works.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear about this, because I understand that as a business owner, we deal a lot with contractors too, because it's expensive as well to have full-time employees. It costs more. So, or like, W2 employees. So I understand that, but I just wanted to bring that up for devil's advocate kind of reasons more than anything, because I know a lot of people ask about that question. But back to something I had asked earlier, and obviously I threw this in with a bunch of other questions, so we haven't gotten to it yet. Let's talk about like an average day as best as we can do that. What's going on in Q&A in the trenches at San Diego on a typical day? Yeah,
so an average day is, and I'm curious to hear your experience too with this, with Lilymo and working with PS4 dev tools and stuff. So an average day is that you have your desk set up, you have a monitor to your right, you have a TV or a monitor to your left that houses your PS4, and so they use a dev tracking software there called Jira. That's like a database. So you have a database of bugs. So like an average day, you sit down, you have your morning coffee or tea, and you check your email, and you go through and you make sure that your build is up to date with dev, and if there were any notes overnight. If you work with, at some teams of Sony, there's a Europe QA, and you'll kind of have a transfer over with them. When I worked on online services, I worked a lot with the Europe team. So you want to have a handover with them, check what they worked on, make sure you're up to date. But with Sony San Diego in the first party, you want to check that. Did a build come in the morning? Is there an expected build if your shift starts at 9 a.m., is there a new build coming in at 10 a.m.? So you wait for that. And then you check if there's been any dev updates on your bugs. Did any devs mark your bugs? Did they note anything? Do you have to recheck any bugs, send them back? And then that's how that goes. So say a new build comes in at 10 a.m. So then you have what is called a smoke check. So you smoke check the build and you load in and out of every single mode, and you make sure that the game can be played. There's no modes crashing or anything on the build, that it's good to go. And then that's when you start to dive into the build. So the team will have anywhere from 20 to 30 testers assigned to it, and they'll be split up into different modes. So when I started working on the Road to the Show career mode, and then eventually worked my way up to the Diamond Dynasty live content mode, because those are the modes I'm passionate about. And so, I would have a team. By the time I made it to MLB 19, I was, one of the lead guys working on Diamond Dynasty. And so I had a team around me and made sure that those guys knew that they were assigned to specific pieces of content that we had to be testing. We had to make sure, the live service modes work, make sure that the clocks are working, stuff like that. And so Jira has the bug database side, and then you have a test plan. And so when you have a test plan, it's basically like your guiding line, your golden path. And then you're going along your test plan, which can take anywhere from, one test can take anything from like 5 minutes. So you do like 100 of these like 5-minute tasks, and then that could be your day. Or you could do something that takes a few hours. So you have to say when Diamond Dynasty launches and there's a new piece of content coming out for the show, there's like 10 games that have to be played, and you have to check mark these specific things. And so you test for and against those, play 6 innings and then get 3 strikeouts. So what if you were playing and then you were hitting on offense as a pitcher and you struck out? Does that count as a strikeout for your statistic? Because it says you struck out as a hitter, but is that a strikeout as a pitcher?
Right.
And so say you strike out as a hitter, and it checks that off, checks out that objective. So that's a bug. So you enter that in as a bug, you send it to the developer, and the developer checks it out and they send it back. You verify it. Is it verified good or correct? So you sign off on it, and then the dev closes it out. So that's like really quick example of finding a bug.
Yeah, bugs are, our games are much smaller, and we don't have QA. We just play test the games with our friends. It's weird what breaks and how things break and why things are broken. And I have a lot more sympathy for developers now than I did 5 years ago about, you want to get things right and perfect. And then like when we launched Twin Breaker, one of the trophies was broken. Now it wasn't actually out for everyone yet, but for the reviewers. And it's like, Jesus Christ, like what do we do? And it was funny. It was a weird bug wherein you can just go to the last stage of Twin Breaker, I think, and then just beat it again, and you'll get the New Game Plus trophy without having beaten any of the other game. Because we didn't make the flags right and all that. So yeah, it's annoying and obnoxious, and I can't imagine with a game the size of the show what that must be like. But I'm also curious about, you had mentioned in your email, I don't know what I can say, but I'm curious. You would offer to talk about it, so I want you to talk to me about PlayStation Neighborhood. This is something that I don't think a lot of people know about, but it's the way you connect your console to get debug checks and put builds on it and stuff. It wasn't always like this before PS4. It was much more physical. I had physical PS3 and PSP dev kits and all these kinds of things, and you'd get these dongles and all this bullshit, but it's a lot easier now. Talk to me about what PlayStation Neighborhood is. I think a lot of PlayStation nerds will just be interested to hear about it.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about that primarily because when you guys had launched Twin Breaker, you and Barry did a Q&A, and I had written a little, comment to you guys asking about what certification was like for you guys and then what dev software is. And you touched on Neighborhood, and I know that you can't really talk about it because you have your like little dev kit software thing. You have NDAs with Sony that, the dev.
Yeah, I think Barry does. I don't sign anything with Sony, but we sign things as a company. And
Gotcha.
The reason that I don't know if PlayStation Neighborhood is something people talk about is because I remember when I first started using it, I would Google to try to get help, and like there's nothing out there about it, So I was like, yeah, this is just some proprietary thing, it seems like.
That's interesting to hear. Yeah. So basically, to let people know what Neighborhood is, and they have it for PS5 too, is it's the software of how your dev kit talks to, your computer, your setup. So this is how you control things without having to go into like a settings menu, like control your network connection, do your software updates, check information from the console. And then there's little tools in there like video capture. You can easily capture a video from Neighborhood because it's second screen to your computer. So you have more, information that the console is spitting out because it's a dev kit, obviously. And so dev kits are interesting, man. I think, when you work on PlayStation, you have Neighborhood. When you're on Xbox, you have Game Manager. I'm not sure what Switch has. I think Switch is a little bit different because you actually get this like Switch box, this dev box. And so
Right. They've always been like that. Nintendo has always been weird with that. They've always had these at IGN with DS and 3DS and Wii U. They had, I forgot about this. I haven't even thought about this. They brought in metal boxes that were drilled to the desks in certain places and then locked to the desks. So you like couldn't even move them. And that's how we captured footage.
wow. Yeah, see, that's even an old thing there. Like I think that there was I think there was old stories about how a PS3 would have like on the bottom of it where like you would like stand it up, there would be like a piece of metal like knocked into it, and then they would lock like the PS3 dev kit down to the desk. So it's, you know, like I talked about old games culture, it's changed a little bit now.
Yeah, I have a PS2 dev kit somewhere. I have to dig it out. That's my favorite dev kit because you know how it says PS2 on the side of the machine in that language instead of PS2. You've probably seen this because you saw it. You were at San Diego. There's probably a graveyard of this shit. It just says test in that text on the side of the units, and I love that
font.
Right.
Yeah. So there's actually like
cool.
at the San Diego office, there's actually like a little like museum display of like old, like how it's come up. And then there's a PS2 dev kit, just this massive Windows 95 PC looking thing. And just PS2.
It's so cool, man.
Yeah.
I love that shit too.
Yeah. That's funny you say graveyard because it really is just like a museum, like in the lobby. Like you walk in, you're like, you know, it's like 1999. This is a PS1 dev kit. Pretty cool.
Well, what's funny about that is like Sony, I was at PlayStation, or I'm not PlayStation. I was at IGN when PS Vita, PS4, and PS like other things came out, like PS TV and shit. And they would send you, you would go get your dev kits and all your test kits for us, and then you would, they would make you sign all these NDAs, very serious. We got to get them back. It was ridiculous. Like there was something like you had a fee or a fine of like $5,000 for every console or something you couldn't account for. And then as the years went on, they would just abandon them. And at IGN, we had just like these cabinets, these rooms full of PlayStation 2s and PlayStation 3s and later PlayStation 4s because they were so serious about them at first. And then there became a time where they just didn't care anymore because they were on to the next thing. And so they're like, oh, you can just keep those. So it's funny how that all worked out. All right, let me ask you about the ladder of QA. What does that hierarchy look like from bottom to top? A person is kind of absorbed at the bottom and then begins to climb this ladder. What does that corporate structure look like within that silo?
Yeah, so when you start in a QA, you're a QA tester, and then there's this ladder of positions. So you can graduate up to a senior QA tester, which is a higher down position in Sony. And then from there, you could move on to be a lead QA tester. And then there's managerial positions. So there's like an assistant manager now, which is a newer position within there. And then there's QA managers all the way at the top. But the thing that I like the most about QA and the opportunities that I talked about within Sony San Diego, and if you worked on like a Santa Monica and a Naughty Dog Insomniac title in QA, you could have these opportunities as well that I talk about is why QA is interesting to me within Sony. And what I don't hear these stories about Activision, by the way, about how if you work in QA at like High Moon or something like that, you can move on to Bungie or you can work on a Treyarch. They don't have a ladder like that. In Sony QA, they want you within the company. It's an advantage to them that somebody came out of PlayStation Studios QA and then moved on to Naughty Dog, moved on to Insomniac, moved on to Sony San Diego. That's a badge of honor to them. That's something to show San Mateo and the powers that be that, hey, we brought someone out of QA and they moved on up. And I hear these stories about how, you know, Neil Druckmann did QA work, David Jaffe did QA work, Scott Rohde did QA work. And so people got started in QA back in the day. You know, that was where you made your bones. That's where you proved it. And I still think that's still true today to a point. You can love QA, you can be passionate about QA and test, and you can find positions in QA for sure where you can work in it forever. But I feel like most people that are in QA have other desires. You know, I personally hope to be a producer. I hope to work in game production one day. You know, people want to be designers, they want to be artists. You know, they went to school for specific things. They want to be coders. They want to be working in the nitty gritty. And really QA is a good opportunity for people to, you know, prove that you can do it. Prove that you can be in game development at the bottom level. Prove that you can do it. And if that shows and you make you make good networking and make good connections with people, you know, you prove it through your work. I've seen people who come into QA and day one, they're hitting up Scott Rohde on Slack. And they're sending him a message. Do you think Scott Rohde is seeing your smiley emoji on Slack? You think he has time for that? No,
Right.
but sorry to name drop, by the way. I
No,
didn't.
it's all good. I love Scott Rhodey. He's an interesting guy.
He's a
I've
great
always,
guy, and he's
yeah,
still there in
he's
San
always
Diego.
been nice to me. So I have no beef with him. The one problem I have with him was back in the day when IGN wrote that Last Guardian, this canceled story, which I didn't write. I was still blamed for that story, and then he like made fun of me on Twitter, and it caused me a lot of anguish.
Oh, gosh.
So thanks, Scott.
Yeah,
But that
pokes
was
a
like,
little
what,
fun at you.
a decade ago.
Yeah,
But he's a great guy.
I'm sorry to name drop that as like an example, but that's what I mean.
It's all good.
Like when you're there in QA, you don't go to the top level and you don't say to someone, "Hey, I want to be a producer." You know, you don't do that. You sit there in the trenches, you know, and you show that you can work in game dev. You show that you can do this, and then something I would do is I would meet with management once a year, and I would have my list of accomplishments and things that I worked on and test plans that I worked on, and that's how you show to management that you can do this. And they, for me, in my experience, they would pass that on to Sony San Diego, and I would have some interviews over there, and I would talk to producers and devs and pick their brain a little bit about production, and then we would talk about career path and we would talk about the ladder. And there's been opportunities for people like that who, you know, I was there when God of War was in QA, and there were opportunities for people that they you know, networked people at Santa Monica. Santa Monica noticed them and they got brought up there. And there's a few people there that are working at Santa Monica now, and they started in San Diego QA. And that's a really cool opportunity. When I see someone who, you know, worked on Spider-Man and they made relationships with Insomniac, they're in Insomniac now as a producer, you know, they're there as a, you know, internal test lead. That's really cool to see that opportunity. And I don't know that I see that anywhere in the industry, where now that, you know, you guys have talked about a ton on the main Sacred Symbol show about Sony's picking up all these studios and Microsoft picking up all these studios. One of the advantages of that from a QA perspective and an entry level perspective is that if you are passionate about certain titles within Sony and you have a studio that you would like to work at, you can prove that on the bottom level. And then you can move up the ladder to eventually have a position at that studio.
I guess I really love your passion because I find it very relatable. It's easy to look back because it's worked for me, but I look back at my experience. This is my 20th year in games as a professional. But before that, I did anything possible to just get noticed. I was very happy to write. I wrote for probably literally, I don't know, thousands of hours probably for free at GameFAQs. I'm not saying that that's a good thing over the years, but it got me noticed, and I was willing to do the work, and I was willing to continue to put myself out there. And I feel like not a lot of people, but there's a lot of vocal people that feel like everything is owed to them, or that they put in X amount of time and then they get Y outcome. And it's like, well, was that X amount of time spent wisely? Did you work hard? Did you prove yourself? I really like to hear that you understand that, and that a lot of other people understand that, because that seems to be a lost art today, in my opinion. And I especially like that you want to get into production, because I get that vibe from you, this organizational brass tacks sort of vibe from you, which is exactly what a producer is. So what's it like in the ranks? Talk to me about the different kinds of people you might encounter in QA. In my experience dealing with QA, because I used to go to studios all the time and play games, it's a very eclectic group. You know, I remember specifically with Jaffe when he was making Twisted Metal, they were at Eat Sleep Play. They were in San Diego doing QA for it, because the same city. And I remember walking in there, and Jaffe was just kind of in the middle of this square room of people at their kiosks, and he would kind of bark out a command. We're playing this map and doing this thing, and then everyone would get going, and then I would sit there and play with them, and it was like a very cohesive thing. But then when we were done working, it really broke up and became a very like fun and casual atmosphere. So I'm just curious, like what the different kinds of people you might encounter are like.
Yeah, so I've been lucky enough to have made a ton of friends working in QA, and you're truly friends for life. You know, working on a game and collaborating with people and stuff. And that's the great thing about game development the most, is that you're not sitting at a desk for 8 hours quietly. That's not how art is made. Games are art. Like, no, not enough people talk about that. And you know, you're collaborating with other creators, you're collaborating with other artists at whatever level you are. So when you collaborate with a QA tester, it's very important to be vocal. It's very important. You don't want to sit there for 8 hours, you know, put on your headphones and listen to Matt Vasgersian talk all day about the statistics. You want to be talking to the guy next to you. You want to be collaborating with them. You want to be talking about ideas and not living in Slack. And so that's one of the most important things to me that we worked on within the QA team when I started taking more of a leadership role within QA, is I wanted to bring that sports team structure. I wanted to treat it like each mode had an assigned team to it, and each one should have, you know, the term we used was team captain because we were on, MLB and keeping that like sports structure there. But yeah, it's good to have a team captain on the mode, someone who understands Road to the Show, someone who understands Diamond Dynasty, March to October when that was a new mode, that had crossover with franchise. And the important thing is that, leads are too busy working on budgets. They're too busy working on Excel sheets. They're too busy working on the big things. A senior QA tester is there to make sure that the other testers are are collaborating, that they're working together, and they're in that mode too. I had a few guys that would be on Diamond Dynasty and they couldn't get out of Road to the Show. They wanted to win 10 Cy Youngs in Road to the Show. So I would go to the Road to the Show guy and I was like, hey, you sit down in the conference room, you're like, hey, so I've got a trade for you. I got a guy on Diamond Dynasty and he's really passionate about Road to the Show. Do you have anyone on Road to the Show that would want to work on Diamond Dynasty? And so you make that change. And those are little things here and there. And you go into a lead meeting, you're like, hey, by the way, we talked about it and we're going to assign this guy to, we're going to make a little trade. And the leads are kind of like, oh, cool. Like, thanks for doing that. We would have noticed that. So it's good. It's good that, there's ways to be listened to, but yeah, it's that collaborative experience, when somebody hits a home run and the ball just keeps going. It just keeps going for miles and everybody's laughing about it. And we're going around and like looking at the game picture, like record that. It's a lot of fun. And man, one of the famous MLB The Show like bug stories was in MLB 17 when they changed like the custom creator. You can check out look up MLB 17 bugs probably on Google Images. And I remember on a stream they showed that like their first facial tests when it was like pre-alpha, the dude had like spikes coming out of his head. He looked like a Pokemon cactus. And it's like you could have someone who is like assigned to the creator and it's like, hey, recreate that. You'd be working on MLB 19 and it would be, hey, that cactus image from 17, make sure that can't be done. Make sure you can't work on that. So, you make a guy with the longest nose ever and the longest beard ever, and then you bring them in game. And then it's like when they're running from home to first base, is their nose moving side to side? Is their beard, are their textures
clipping
proper? And so we'd send pictures like that and you laugh about it. And, it's a lot of fun. And one of the quotes I use all the time is on The Office when Andy is like the manager and he's like, you don't know the good old days are over until they're gone. And I'm sure you could speak to that with the old IGN days and the crew you had there. Sure. It's the same thing in QA. You work on these games for a year to 2 years to 3 years. That's a long period of time to be working with the same people, to be collaborating with them. You think about how sports teams win championships, how they'll always remember that. I will always remember every single person on MLB 19, the day that MPD put out that was the best-selling baseball game ever, that we passed MVP Baseball 05, which is one of my favorite baseball games ever. And the people that shared those stories, and I was in college and I played NCAA Baseball 05 because I was going to Kansas University, and then I upgraded that to MVP Baseball 05. There are people that work on the show today that grew up playing those games, and to share those stories and to have that moment and that accomplishment is like one of the greatest accomplishments I think in my life, is that I can say that I had a small piece. I laid one brick on the greatest selling baseball game of all time. So
yeah, right on, man. I love that attitude. And I do feel I feel like I am the rare games media person or games podcaster that also loves sports. And I've always been a huge fan. I played hockey most of my life, and then I love football, I love baseball, I love all these different things. And I always felt like there was such a commonality between sport and video games, and I've always been disconcerted by the sports ball and all this kind of shit that comes out of a lot of corners of video games, because they are such a natural marriage. And I know Chris has made the argument before on our show where it's like Madden is a turn-based role-playing game, and it's like so interesting when you approach it like that. And you'd love some of the people I knew in the past. My roommate in college for a couple of years, Doug, shout out to Doug, he would just play Xbox 360 when it first came out, NCAA football, but all he would do was sit there for literally hours and just simulate games and seasons and do all this random shit. He would never actually play the game. And then he would get into this baseball stuff on his computer where people were playing in these years old fictional leagues with fictional players and trading them. And there was all this real money on the line. And it was just so cool. And it reminded me of how vibrant sports gaming is and how shitty it is that it's reduced sometimes to a yearly Madden release and, Pro Evolution going free to play and all this stuff when there's so much more texture to it. And so I'm glad to hear some of these stories. Did you ever crunch? I mean, we hear about this a lot. Talk to me about crunch, the so-called crunch.
Sure.
My entire life is crunch.
Yeah.
So I can't really relate to it being a one-off thing.
The Jason Schreier fearmongers that will have you think you're working from 10 a.m. to 2 a.m. and then you got to go home at 2 a.m. because you got to go sleep for 8 hours. That's California labor law. It's not like that at all. So
yeah, so talk to me about that.
The fact of the matter with crunch and crunch culture is it's so overblown in the internet age. And I mean, how much were you hearing about crunch during the PS2 and PS3 days? People are talking about it now because, it's affected them, and it's different. It's different for every company. I'm sure we're going to hear more about that. And as the industry goes on and more stories come out about different dev cycles and stuff. But for MLB The Show and for Sony, it's basically just a matter of, does your budget have time? Do you have enough time to make it to the release date? Do you need to plug away on this? Are there specific bugs? Are there areas of tests that need it? And so when you're, one thing that you do working on development is you have this Excel sheet. It's called a health report. And health report's one of the main things I would work on, because Diamond Dynasty is a live content mode. It's living, it's growing. It's a mode that not necessarily does it need to be complete right before launch, because right at launch is when all the content goes up. That's when it's all there. So it's a tough mode. And I feel like, I was one of the people who understood it, and there's guys there that do understand that mode. You have to understand that live content mode to a point where right up to certification, you got to make sure that there's a test mode here. You got to make sure that this works. Because even though you're going to upload it right before day one and have the content up there, certification needs to see that all those things work. You need to check all that. And so really crunch, what you talk about it in a nutshell, is getting your game tidied up, getting it ready to go for certification. You're not working, 16 hours a week. You might stay a couple hours late on like a Wednesday or a Thursday because a build is going to need to be ready by Friday. You might get asked to do that. I saw a story just today about how all the time on Call of Duty development, people are like packing their bags, getting ready to go, and they go, "Hey, you're going to stay till 10 o'clock." And it's like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Like, what? You're going to stay for 5 hours? You're going to let us know that now? These things are talked about weeks in advance. You need to be talking about this like, hey, during this week, if this needs to be ready by Friday, then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, instead of being off at 5, we're going to work till 7. This is a crunch is a seriously like a top level issue. It's just, there's a miscommunication there between production, development, and QA on when the deadlines are. There's somebody who's not getting their job together, and that's why crunch from a QA perspective looks like it's last minute. It literally looks like at 4:55, someone decided, hey, all you guys need to stay for 2 hours. That's a retail mentality. That's somebody called out for the cash register and you're getting ready to go and clock off, and they go, hey, you need to cover the cash app for 2 hours. I worked in retail for like 4 years, so I understand that completely. And when I hear that, it hurts me in my soul, because I think of those old retail days, and it never was like that in my experience. We knew the days when we had to stay a couple hours. We knew the things that we had to clean up and get ready to go. And when your team is collaborative like that, when your team understands what needs to get done, then you can present it that way. And I'm sure every game is different, and I can't speak to every game, but there's always going to be those games where there's not enough time, and that's a shame.
Well, it seems like things are never finished. Like, it's just, especially in this iterative world, I can understand putting out a game. I mean, I look at our games all the time. We make just arcade games basically, and I look at them, I'm like, man. I mean, we literally just remade our first game from the studs because we wanted to just do it again, and make it better. So I totally understand that iterative process. Just out of curiosity, if they were to ask you to stay not till 5, but till 7, you get compensated for those hours, right? Because I think this is an important part of the equation. I think some people think that like you get paid 8 hours and then you stay for 14. It's like, no, I think if you stay for 14, you get paid for 14. Is that not inaccurate?
Yeah, this is just people not understanding basic labor law. And I'm sorry that your high school didn't teach this in economics class, but in the state of California, if you stay past your 8 hours, you are getting paid more. You're getting paid 1.5. And if you
time and a half.
Yeah, and there's extra breaks in there. You're not working 4 hours straight. It would annoy me sometimes that by law I had to take an extra half-hour break. Like, cool, I could be getting this done in the next quicker. Half hour. Right. But I have to take a half-hour break. Okay,
and then it's costing them more.
Because I'll just go watch SportsCenter for half an hour then, and then come back to my desk and then finish what I was working on. So thank you for that. But they're doing their thing, and people don't understand. Like, if you work till 10. You're not working from 5 to 10 straight. You have to take a meal break. There's specific labor laws to this, and there's protections to this. And, God forbid you were to work 10 hours in the day and then work a little extra, because that's double time. Do you think someone wants 20 QA testers making double time? That's so much money. That's so much to take off on the budget. So, it's different, but most of these game dev stories, Colin, are coming out of LA. So I know they're in the same state as me. I know that they're in California.
Interesting.
So
yeah, it's not all Raven in Wisconsin. It's actually all done.
Exactly.
So it's interesting because I don't really know what the point is of. I know that some of the situations are very bad. There's no doubt, but I also feel like I don't really know what's the end goal to try to persuade people that this is so bad, other than scaring good people, hardworking people away from the possibility of getting involved in game development. It seems antithetical to the entire situation to me.
I mean, it's fear mongering. It's the same thing as why is there fear mongering on Facebook and Twitter? It's because there's this vocal minority that makes everyone think that the games industry is terrible, that QA, you're going to be making $13 an hour forever. Minimum wage in California is like $15 now, by the way. Like, I'm not making $7.50 to work cash wrap. You're understood that this is an entry level position, that you should have goals. You should have things to that. And I hate that there's this internet mob on Reddit, on Reset Era, that really wants you to think that you can't get into the games industry at QA. I'm here to tell people, yeah, you can. If you want to be an artist, if you want to be a producer, you talked about Doug. Doug could have been a data analyst because he was simming all those franchise years, because that's what data analysts do for sports games. You were supposed to sim a franchise for 20 years and make sure that those statistics are realistic. That after 20 years, Tom Brady doesn't play till he's 65 years old in Madden and doesn't have 12,000 touchdowns because his toughness rating is 99,
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah, he became a lawyer instead, fool.
Yeah, exactly, right? But yeah, I hate that stigma, Colin. I just have to say, like, I stand up on my soapbox for a minute and say that, like, QA is a great entry-level job. It's a great way to get into the industry. I worked at the last PSX 2017, and I remember I met Scott Lowe and I met Brian Altano, who used to work at IGN. And both of them told me they were really happy that I wasn't in games journalism for 5 years, wasting my life, when I would have eventually gone into a game dev position, because they could see that passion. And that they were like, if you'd worked in journalism, you would have worked there for 5 years, probably would have been miserable because you would have had that itch. You would have wanted to work in game dev, and then you would have wasted 5 years of your life, and a game dev would have scooped you up. It's the back door into games industry. That's what it really is. It's a back door into game development. I didn't know that I wanted to be a producer in 2017. I didn't know that I had this passion about design and systems. I just knew that I loved games. And I feel like there are so many people out there all over the globe. If you worked on the East Coast, you could find a position at Epic. You could do QA on Fortnite. And as terrible as that sounds,
North Carolina.
You might learn Unreal on a way that, if say that you're at home right now and you're just working on an Unreal exercise, you're working on Unreal for free. If you worked in QA and you worked for Epic and you worked on Unreal, you could learn Unreal, you could learn the game, you could get paid for it, and then you could be networking and learning that ladder to eventually build your way up to production, dev, and all that. QA really is a secret back door into the industry, and it shouldn't be secret. It shouldn't be the secret club. It really should be what we talked about. It should be a sports farm system. Our developers of tomorrow should be coming out of QA today.
Yeah, very well said. It is a place where they can marinate and learn, like you said. And it's interesting because as far as your mindset, I worked what we would call a blue collar job when I was in college as a landscaper and a groundskeeper. And I was personally, so it would snow and they would tell us, like, it's going to snow. You guys need to be on call for the next 24 hours, whatever. And we would get time and a half to just be on call. And I'd be like, this is awesome. Like, I want to work as much as possible. Like, keep me here forever. This is awesome. So just from a money standpoint, I didn't understand people's complaints. Like, I always had that grind mindset. I'm like, oh, I can just put more money away. So I don't know. I think some people find their way into these situations and don't realize it requires some character and hard work. And I think that you're absolutely right. It's a very open secret in the industry. If you want to get into game dev, become a QA contractor, get into QA, do something on the lower rung. Don't expect you're going to become a designer at Insomniac off the bat or something like that. But I also know many people that climb to the top, and you're right. People like Neil Druckmann and all these. Neil Druckmann is the president of Naughty Dog. And
he did QA on Jack too.
Right, exactly.
And then he worked on code. And then the story's been told a million times, but Neil worked on code and wanted to get into design. He was passionate about design. He was passionate about writing. And from what the stories say about Naughty Dog, Neil was a great coder. Neil designed the UI for Jack Combat Racing, which was apparently, like, he talked about in an interview that it was one of, like, you know, the worst tasks he's ever had to work on in the industry was designing the UI for Jack X Combat Racing. But he proved that, and then was a writer and designer on Uncharted. And now look at where he is. He's making a Last of Us show for HBO. So
yeah,
like, think about that. Think about where you could start. You could start all the way in QA, but like we talked about, nobody wants to work the blue collar job and work their way up the ladder. Nobody wants to start there. Everybody thinks that they're going to graduate from college and write their fanfic for Spider-Man and become the creative director for Spider-Man 3. So you got to work your way up.
Yeah, in my opinion too, these people that are especially obsessive about working on specific IP or for very specific companies, I always encourage people to just expand your mind. It's more likely you're going to work on something new, and that's more fun anyway, in my opinion. But I wanted to ask you, you had left San Diego by the time the show, I guess, would have come to Xbox the following year.
Yeah, multi-platform.
Which
also was my dream.
You were there though when the announcement was. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say that was like a dream come true, because I'm actually an Xbox fan. I'm not, like, you know, people talk about, you know, you work at PlayStation, you're a PlayStation gamer. I'm actually an Xbox fan. I almost have 200,000 gamer score, by the way. So
nice.
Yeah, I love that very much. Shout out. But yeah, I mean, that's like a funny thing, is that I feel like right when I left was when the multi-platform dream was there, and it would have been interesting to see that perspective.
Yeah, I would have loved that to hear about that, because I am fascinated, as I've been saying here on the show, like, I am fascinated by the reality that San Diego studio had Xbox Series X dev kits before the console came out. And somehow there had to be a Chinese wall between, like, Sony could have very easily gone and started fucking with those machines and figuring things out about them. And I just love all of the machinations behind the scenes that must keep them separate. And I would have loved to hear more about that. And now that's even going to be bigger with Nintendo Switch in the mix and all of that. So I know you said that you worked on Ready, Set, Heroes 2. This is a game from 2019 from Robot Entertainment. People would know them best for Orcs Must Die. What was it like working on a smaller external project that was kind of marinated in the second party?
Yeah, second party development's really interesting. You know, there's a team at the time. Gio Corsi was there, so he was like the main guy picking up the second party titles, and then his production team, you would have time to work with them. And Ready Set Heroes is really interesting because Robot is a very small studio in Texas, and you know, I got to know that dev team very well. It's a small QA team. You know, you work on the title. It's a smaller title, and Ready Set Heroes is a lot of fun. It's like a dungeon crawling Mario Party game is what we used to tell people. And so I felt like I learned a lot from game development from that perspective, because I learned more about production and producer work from that, working and seeing the producers at Sony and the producers at Robot and the test time for that. So that was different work, because you would rattle these bugs and you would write so many bugs and it would go to production. And then it was just a matter of the producers, you know, they don't expect too many bugs coming in, but you know, the QA masters at Sony are coming in and they're throwing out 50 bugs out there, and then going to the devs and everything. And I think it was interesting for them because Robot would QA internally. And so because their second party relationship, they had this service to them where they had this QA team that could go in there and check it out. And then the devs would plug away at it for 2 weeks and they would be like, oh, I didn't realize this. I didn't realize this. And I was lucky enough to go to the PAX 2019 right before the pandemic and work at the Ready Set Heroes booth and meet some of the dev team with Robot and talk to them about the game. And they were like, oh, wow, for just being like a QA tester, you really understand this game systematically. And that was kind of a click for me. You know, I never would have realized that production work and design work could have happened without a small game like Ready Set Heroes and talking to those people. And I would talk to the lead designer and I would be like, oh yeah, you know, I found this bug with like this enemy and stuff like that. And then he would realize, because of that bug, he had to completely change how that enemy worked. He had to completely change that on a mechanical perspective. And so we were talking about that, and he's like, you know, without those bugs from QA, I never would have realized that enemy, frankly, wasn't working. And we took that in a completely different direction. So that was really cool. It was really cool to have that experience. Right
on, man. Yeah, I love the positivity of your experience and the way you talk about it, because it gives you a lot of different perspectives that are useful for future projects, of course. I'm curious what it was like working on PlayStation Vue. You had brought that up. This is, of course, the ill-fated attempt for television, I guess.
Yeah, that was an interesting time.
PlayStation.
That was an interesting time.
What was that about? What was that like?
Mid 2017, I think. And man, working on entertainment QA compared to game dev QA, it's not too different if you understand test cases from that perspective. But it's interesting to break an app. Like, imagine how many times someone has froze Netflix because they scrolled the tab for too long. Or when you play the Netflix, you play the Hulu game, you scroll through these tabs, you keep going along, and notice one thing: your app never freezes. Why is it never freezing? Why are you able to click in and out of 50 shows at a time? Why does the app not break? Why does the memory not break? It's because there's a QA tester at Netflix or Hulu somewhere, and that's exactly what I did for PlayStation Vue. So my favorite test cases that everyone hated there, which I thought was hilarious when I joined the team, was they hated doing split screen QA. And so split screen as a kid, I was like, dude, I can watch cartoons and have the Padres game in the corner, picture in picture on my TV. This is amazing. This is the greatest thing ever. And so you get there in the morning and I would sign out all the split screen test cases. And then I would four channel split screen, ESPN, ESPN2, Fox Sports, and then NFL Network. Just why not? And then split through the two. And so, God forbid you have to sit there and watch TV. Oh no. But you're looking for things here and there. Are the closed captions working? Have any of your split screens frozen as you're going along? You have to critically watch TV, as dumb as that sounds. But all these apps do it. There's someone at Google right now who's doing that for YouTube TV, making sure that it works. And I hear about all the time. And I'm one of the things for TV that I hate the most is that to bring it back to sports, I'm a Lakers fan. You have to have cable to watch Lakers games because it's on Spectrum Sportsnet. That's not on streaming anywhere. And that's something that Vue made me think about, because I thought about, the sports package perspective and testing different packages of streaming and all that, and how that all works. And Vue was really cool purely from the perspective of it really worked that whether you were on PlayStation, whether you were on web, whether you were on mobile devices, that product just worked. It was cool to see that you really could be watching like a household and TV. And that was when I first learned about that TV streaming culture and that product. And it was a bit too early for it, I think. That by the time like that Sony had invested in PlayStation Vue and they had a team in LA, and that team had brought some of the Vue QA testers. They hired them on and they brought them up to LA and they'd worked there. And unfortunately, they were a victim of layoffs when Vue was gone. And then some of them landed within PlayStation networking and stuff like that throughout the company. And it was unfortunate. It's unfortunate because I see products like YouTube TV and DirecTV Stream and all that, and I always think of Vue. I always think of when I worked on Vue and like the feature set and stuff. And there's little things missing here and there that I feel like Vue had, and unfortunately, it was a product. It was a product of its time. It was a little too early. It was a little too early to the game, but I thought it was a really cool product, and it was a really cool time working on that. And that's specifically, by the way, to just bring it back to the QA experience. That was where I learned about test cases the most, because I have never seen a more detailed and more thorough test plan than testing an application like PlayStation Vue. That test plan was incredible. And I've interviewed at other dev studios. They talk about how their QA studios have like a test plan Bible. Man, you ain't never seen a test plan like PlayStation Vue, let me tell you what. And that's like real nerdy QA stuff. That the fact that someone had sat there and made a 100 page, test plan of like, look at this area, look at this area, look at this area. And it was thorough. You could check every area of PlayStation Vue and see like what was broken and what was not, purely by just following from point A to point B. And that's really a goal in QA itself. Can you create a test plan where someone can go from point A to point B and find all the bugs? Can you do it? So it was a cool experience. Yeah, good time.
Well, sleep well and RIP PlayStation Vue. We miss you. I never actually used it. So, Kendrick, I think we have a pretty good episode here. Stop right here. This is good because I want to actually call this episode QA is good, actually, because it'll be a different perspective that people can hear about what it's like and the positives and the conduit by which you can get into games and why it's important and all of the rest. I really appreciate you taking the time to tell us a little bit about this, because I feel like it's much needed. It's much needed balance to the overriding conversation about what things are really like. And again, I'm not diminishing the experience of people like Jessica Gonzalez and others, but that's Activision. and this is Sony. And I'm not saying that as a, from a fanboy perspective. It's different. I've said many times, I've heard nothing but good things about, well, not nothing, but very good things about working at PlayStation, very good things about working at Xbox as well. So not every company is broken. That's why I'm a little confused why Microsoft wants to absorb that broken culture, but that's going to be their problem soon. Kendrick, how can people find you? Do you want people to be able to find you online, Twitter or anything like that?
So you can find me on Twitter at Kendrick Luck, where I lament the terrible Lakers season they're having and my sports thoughts. That's really where I get my sports journalism juice out there. But if I can for a minute, can I talk about my solo podcast that I do on the side?
Yeah, please do. Yeah, pitch yourself, please.
Yeah, so I do a solo podcast that I started during the pandemic just to kind of just an outlet for my thoughts and things that I like. So it's called Kendrickcast, KENDRICKAST, and it's a Kendrick podcast. And so I do a lot of solo shows on there, and it's primarily inspired by you at Last Stand Media and the Ringer Podcast Network. And so it's one feed that's home to whatever shows I feel like putting up and whatever topics we want to talk about. So I mainly talk about sports on there. I love talking about the NFL season. That's if I was in another world, I would be an NFL beat reporter. But so I've been doing a ton of work for the NFL season, but in the off season, I talk about Marvel movies. I love the MCU, talk about superhero movies. We talk about games on there from time to time, talk about games. And then I have great guest shows on there. So there's one show that is an homage to Knockback, which I think Knockback with you and Dagan, by the way, is the best podcast on the internet without a doubt. Got to throw that out there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's very
I do a show with my partner, Michelle, and it's called Memories. And so it's a really great show where we talk about, it's nostalgic fueled, and it's really memories in your life that are memes to you today. So we laugh about oh my gosh, there was a time in first grade when I cried during lunch because I just had an anxiety attack. And then we go into, why did you have anxiety at 6 years old and stuff like that? So that's a really great show. And so Kendrickcast, if you have enjoyed this show, check it out.
Right on, man. Well, I appreciate you spreading your positivity and your kindness, and you're very welcome back here. And we'll have you back maybe in the future and pick your brain more.
Thanks so much. We need more of it. We need more positivity in this industry and people talking about, fight the good fight. Talk about why you love game devs. Talk about your passions. There's so many passionate people out there that I feel like aren't sharing their passion, and you need to be out there. One of the things I use Twitter for, I think every indie dev of every indie game that I play, and I tell them that this game was awesome because they need to hear that. Indie devs need to hear that stuff. So
I agree.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you. And thank you all out there for your love, kindness, and support of all things Last Stand Media and Sacred Symbols. Appreciate you. We'll see you next time for more conversations and all the rest. Until then, goodbye. Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Colin's Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show is conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. It's edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you.